The Trump administration announcing just minutes ago that they're going to impose new sanctions on Russia. These sanctions come in response to the poisoning of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. The United Kingdom blaming Russia for using a military-grade Soviet-era nerve agent that nearly killed them on UK soil. Moscow has denied that charge. CNN's Jim Sciutto joins me now. And Jim, what can you tell me about these sanctions?
Well, the first thing we should note is these sanctions are required by law, long existing U.S. law, when it's determined by the U.S. that a country has used chemical weapons, as the U.S. has determined here, that Russia used a chemical weapon to attempt to commit murder on UK soil. We should note that the Trump administration is imposing these sanctions about 30 days after the deadline imposed by that law, but they are following the law as it's written. You have two potential rounds here. The first round of sanctions, relatively light. It can affect some exports, some financing. The real test is going to be if Russia does not allow inspections of chemical weapons facilities and does not make assurances they will not use chemical weapons again. Then there are even harsher sanctions that could ban all imports and exports and diplomatic relations. That will really be the real test for this administration.
Interesting. So their hands is forced. They're kind of in doing this because they have to. That's
Yes,
the law.
exactly.
And earlier today, an interesting move, Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, delivering by hand a letter from President Trump, giving it to Putin's administration in Russia. It's not really clear what's in the letter, though.
No, it's not. And initially, Rand Paul advertised this as something, as he was sort of a courier here between President Trump and President Vladimir Putin. But we are told by White House sources that, in fact, President Trump was, in effect, doing a favor for Rand Paul. Rand Paul was in Moscow. He wanted to meet with the Russian president, and President Trump, this according to the White House, wrote a letter of introduction, and that this was not some secret communication between Trump and Putin.
Tonight, Republican Senator Rand Paul announcing that he delivered a letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin, which he claimed was from President Donald Trump. Tweeting, quote, "The letter emphasized the importance of further engagement in various areas, including countering terrorism, enhancing legislative dialogue, and resuming cultural exchanges." The White House, however, says the letter was written at the request of the senator, not the president, to help Paul obtain a meeting with Putin that has not happened during his solo trip to Russia. President Trump provided a letter of introduction, Hogan Gidley, deputy press secretary, said in a statement. In the letter, the president mentioned topics of interest that Senator Paul wanted to discuss with President Putin. Senator Paul and Mr. Trump, however, share an interest in improving relations between the U.S. and Russia. While in Moscow, Paul spoke of the need for diplomacy.
Diplomacy, conversations, dialogue, communication, all of that is incredibly important. And my goal in coming to Russia is to say that we want to have open lines of communication.
However, Paul did not answer CNN's question when asked if he confronted Russian officials about Russia's ongoing interference in U.S. politics.
Senator, did you speak about election interference as well? Did that come up?
We had general discussions about a lot of issues, and basically we've decided that right now what we're trying to do is have dialogue, and I don't think we solve issues other than, see, our biggest issue right now is no dialogue. It isn't the issues at hand.
Paul's apparent lack of urgency stands in sharp contrast to the nation's senior-most national security officials. Just last week, they delivered the stark warning that Russian interference remains pervasive today.
It goes beyond the elections. It goes to Russia's intent to undermine our democratic values.
Now, Putin's press secretary says that this letter was delivered through what he called diplomatic channels. They say, the Kremlin, that they have not yet reviewed it. And we should note that the meeting between Putin and Paul has not happened. Jake?